Well, my name's Arthur Yates, and I was in the United States Air Force, and I joined the Air Force in 1950. At the time, when the Korean War started, I was in college, and they didn't have any deferment for they had the draft in, just like it was in World War II, where people were drafted into the services. So when I was on vacation from college, I found out I was going to be drafted. And there was no deferment policy then. 6 months later, they had a deferment policy. If you were in college, you could stay in college till you graduated and then go in the service. But they didn't have that, so I had to leave college, and I could have joined. I didn't want to go in the Army, so I joined the Air Force before the Army got me, which would have been 2 weeks later. So anyhow, that's how I got in the Air Force. Then after I got in the Air Force, I went through training, and I wanted to fly and be a pilot, but I couldn't pass the eye test, because your eyes have to be perfect, 20/20, and I didn't know I had a little astigmatism, so I couldn't pass the eye test. So since I couldn't fly, then I they put me in intelligence school, and I went through training to be an intelligence non-commissioned officer. So I ended up briefing combat crews and interrogating the crews after they came back from their mission to determine how the mission went. And then those reports are made up and they're sent to the headquarters so that they can make the plans for the next missions. And of course, this just goes on day after day during the combat area. And then the other duties, as I said, you help brief the troops in your section about the intelligence activities that are going on in the combat areas, so that they are aware. I got shipped to Okinawa, and I was there for 18 months, and it was quite a different experience, because Okinawa then, it's 65 miles long, the island, 2 miles wide. Everything that was there is concentrated in 1/3 of the island. 2/3 of the island is all jungle. I mean, nobody can live there. And Okinawa now is a resort. The Japanese go there. When I got there, the roads was all mud. There were no buildings, nothing. It's hard to believe that it's developed like it has now. Of course, that was 60-some years ago. But when I got there, let me back up a minute. At the end of World War II, one of the last major battles on the ground before the A-bomb was the U.S. forces forcing the Japanese that were on Okinawa, forcing them off the island or killed. The fighting was terrible. So there were still landing barges from World War II that were stuck in the sand when I got there. And you waded through mud, and it was pretty bleak. But they had a big Air Force base there with an airstrip, and that's where I was in a B-29 group, and that's where the pilots came, and we briefed them, and they'd load the bombs and fly to North Korea and back, 10-hour trip. So it was pretty rough. And the hours were, they didn't have much time off, because you would brief the crews, they'd take off, and then you're preparing the next day, and then when the crews come back, you would interrogate them to find out what happened. And it just seemed like there wasn't much time. That was in the beginning. Then finally we got a commanding officer that decided that rather than work all of us 7 days a week with little sleep, he decided it would be a lot better if he gave everybody 1 day off a week so that you could go do something. So we really liked that. So that was pretty good. And after he came, then we got a little time off and were able to, well, there wasn't much to do there, but at least we could do something, you know. We'd go down and, you know, it's an island, so we could go to the beach and swim. Of course, it's pretty hot there, but, and then they had clubs, you know, like, and they'd have a band come in and dance, so you could go, and then a lot of the native people that lived there, well, the women primarily, because we were all men, they would come and we could dance with them at these clubs. So that helped to do something when you had time off. So that's kind of how it was. In 1950, probably hard for you to realize, I mean, you know, because of your background yourself. In 1950, there were no televisions, okay, and there certainly were no iPhones. The bottom line is, if you can picture this, it may be hard, but try. The only way you got information in 1950 about what's going on in the world and even in the United States was by newspapers. Well, unfortunately, you can imagine if you're depending on a newspaper or somebody word of mouth, that's going to be filtered significantly. So a lot of what was going on in the world or in the war was very filtered and very limited, because you couldn't get on the web and go and see what was really going on somewhere, because there was no web, there was no television. So you pretty much heard from people that were in your area about somebody's interpretation of what was going on somewhere. When the U.S. started fighting, they sent a lot of U.S. troops over there without lack of training, and the casualties were terrible because they didn't have enough training and they just got slaughtered. So it took quite a while before the U.S. could start pushing some of the North Koreans back. And then, like in the bomb group I was in, as soon as the bombers got there, we started bombing in North Korea the bridges to stop the supplies coming from Russia and China into the North Korea. So we bombed the bridges and the airfields to try to stop supplies from supplying the North Korean armies that were trying to take over South Korea. And essentially the fighting went on very severe from 1950 to 1953. An armistice was signed in July 27th, 1953 to stop the fighting. And it just so happened, my birthday's on July 27th. When I got back from overseas and I got back into the thing, I still was in service for a while. And so, I still had a uniform. So sometimes I would be in uniform when I'd be going somewhere back in the United States. And a couple of times I remember I was going somewhere on a bus on Wilshire Boulevard to go into Westwood, and I had my uniform on. And I thought people were looking at me like, what the hell is this guy doing in a uniform? They were looking at me because this is the way I perceived it. And I later found out a lot of people did not understand the Korean War. Remember I told you there was no television. So they didn't even, a lot of people back in the United States in the Korean War, they didn't even know the Korean War was going on. Furthermore, they were sick and tired of World War II war, so they didn't want to hear about it, they didn't want to see about it, anything. they figured in the service now, when there's no war, quote, no war going on, because they didn't accept the Korean War, is a loser. And I sensed a thing about people sometimes thinking, you're in uniform, you know, there's no war, what the hell's going on? Well, what they didn't know was people were getting killed in the Korean War and slaughtered, and their lives being upset, like being I couldn't go to college. But the people didn't understand that, and so I really felt really resentful of the way a lot of people treated the people that were in the service during that period. So we weren't treated as heroes.